Everyone, and welcome to our continuing series about education law, school law, whatever you want to call it, and specifically important issues that arise with IEPs. I'm Lisa Kirsch Satawa from Kirsch Daskas Law Group, and this collection of videos has been put together to help parents navigate through the IEP process in these very challenging times. Why are they challenging, you ask? Because every IEP has to be based on measurable data, um, and that is received as a result of progress checks and notes throughout a period of time to see if children are meeting their goals. And excuse me, since there was distance learning and people have not been able to have their children's progress monitored, we're missing a substantial starting point in the IEP process, which is where is my child now? So it's my hope through this series of videos, and the next couple will all be focused on goals, objectives, and measuring those goals and objectives. But certainly, we've talked about this topic before in different ways, but this is going to be really nitty gritty to help you understand if your child IEP is compliant with federal law, which is obviously really important. So, first of all, just a basic introduction. The federal law that provides children the right to an individualized education is called the IDEA, which is the Individual and Disabilities Education Act. And it says that every eligible child who has a disability and his parents are protected. His or her parents are protected. Basically, it allows for every child to have access to the curriculum and receive a free and appropriate public education. When we talk about a free and appropriate public education, we're talking about a public education for all students, not just students with special ed or with disabilities, um, or with ineligibility for additional services. So when we talk about that, what we're talking about is that the schools must provide access to the curriculum. If they are providing it to general ed students, they also have to provide that same curriculum or access to the curriculum to children with disabilities. We've had long talks about supports and accommodations and all that stuff in the past, so we're not going to get into details about that right now. Because really, before you can even figure that out, you have to have concrete, measurable goals in the IEP of what, based on where your child is now, where they're going to go. There should be short-term objectives as well as long-term objectives, and it should be defined what those are. Short-term objectives are not required by the IDEA, but anything you read about them from a legal standpoint, a district would probably be a little bit dumb not to include them in an IEP. The the focus of the IEPs is to have a team with information about how the child learns, how the child has to be taught, and knowledge of the individual child's disability, not just the label or the diagnosis, but how it actually affects their ability to learn. And they get together to form the IEP team. We've talked about before, there are certain members of the team that are absolutely required to be there. There must be a special ed teacher, there must be a general ed teacher, the parents must be there, the student must be there, and then usually the school psychologist, maybe a speech therapist, the director of special ed. Those are all members of the team that are required. If you wish to have additional people there who are familiar with the child, with the way your child learns, perhaps you have a nanny who helps your child with their homework every day. The nanny may be a really good contributing source at the IEP meeting. if there's a speech therapist from outside of school that's providing those services. That might be someone who should either submit in writing a report about the progress or be present at the meeting. Parents, you must let the whoever's organizing the team, usually it's the director of special ed, you must let them know in advance of who you are bringing or who is going to participate, and not just their name, but who they are, what their role is. Um, just like the district has to give you notice. Parents, you can excuse people from the meeting, the district cannot. Um, you if your child struggles in a certain topic or subject, like struggles in reading, then it would probably be really important that the teacher that is present, whether it's the gen ed teacher or the special ed teacher, be your child's reading teacher, um, so that they can give the most accurate information about how your child is learning, how they need to be taught, what's successful, what's not successful, and it can all be incorporated into the IEP. But I don't want to focus on who's at the meeting. I want to focus on the elements of the IEP and the measurable goals, because this is just critical information for people to understand. So first of all, every IEP has certain elements to it. There has to be a present level of academic and functional performance. That's known as the Plaafp, Plaafp. There is measurable annual goals or measurable objectives and measurable goals. And 3, there has to be a statement of needed special education or other services. There are 3 items those are like the elements. So these are items at the heart of the IEP. And it's a threefold inquiry that needs to be made. What are this child's unique needs? What services will the school employ to address these unique needs individually? And what will the child be able to accomplish as a result of these services? So those are the 3 questions that need to be asked in order for the elements to be fulfilled, and then looking at the goals and objectives. So it's important to understand the difference between goals, objectives, and benchmarks. They're kind of used, you know, contemporaneously. Well, that's not the right word. They're kind of interchangeably um, at this point, but they really have their own meanings that you should understand. Goals and objectives are pretty much the same thing, but we look at objectives as short-term criteria to get to a goal. So if you're making a cake, the objective number 1 may be to mix or to get out all the ingredients. Objective number 2 may be to mix them all in a bowl. Objective number 3 may be to put it in the pan. Objective number 4 is to put it in the oven. And then the goal is to have a homemade cake, which would be accomplished when it comes out of the oven. So that's a very simplistic way to look at it, but I think it gives you the understanding. A benchmark is the amount of progress that a child is expected to achieve in a longer period of time. It could be a year, for example. Or it could be within specific segments of a year, depending on what the goal is and what's appropriate for that individual child. As I mentioned earlier, short-term objectives are not always required, but they're best practice. They are not required if the child's being measured against standards of the general curriculum or at grade level. They are required if they're being measured by anything else. So if you have a child who's in third grade but reads at second grade level, then they're being assessed at second grade level, then you do need short-term objectives. If they're being assessed for third grade level, and we're using that as the benchmark, then you don't need short-term objectives. But as I said before, that it would be not wise on the part of the district, and they could be opening themselves up for some legal liability. So the IEP must be individual, and it must not be completed and done before the meeting. It is a work in progress that everyone on the team must contribute to. It is a violation of the IDEA to have it predetermined, which means it's all filled out and done before you even get there. The three principles that Congress always talks about that are critical to the rights of parents and children who are meet the eligibility requirements are that special education students must be making progress. They must, special educators need to accurately and objectively measure student progress, and progress must be accurately and meaningfully reported to parents. That's a lot of things that are guaranteed that are really vast. So let's break that down a little. First of all, a lot of people, believe that, you go to this IEP meeting and then, everyone approves everything and then it's just going to happen. We've talked about before that the number one error that parents make is to be too deferential to the educators. You are your child's first teacher. You are the one who's watched your child grow and learn every year, every grade, every minute, summer, winter, spring, fall. So your role is really important. And the most important role is to make sure that every single teacher is aware of the IEP. IEPs are delivered to your child's teacher when they're completed, but that could take a month. That's a whole month that your child hasn't gotten what they should have in the classroom. So I always recommend that you personally give every teacher your child's last evaluation as well as the IEP. And a lot of times teachers aren't even aware at the beginning of the school year which students have IEPs unless they have a pretty severe disability, and then they know they're coming and they are familiar with them probably as they've been coming up the grades. So that's really important. The IEP is a legal document. It is 100% enforceable in a court of law. And if it's insufficient, then it violates federal law. So it's something that we need to take really seriously. There's important guidelines for the development of IEPs, and basically, if you understand these guidelines for proper development of an IEP, then you're going to be able to say that your child's getting FAPE. And if these particular guidelines are not followed, then there could possibly be a violation of the IDEA, and therefore your child is being denied FAPE. So very, very important to be familiar with them. As I mentioned earlier, parents are full and equal partners on the IEP team. And it is very, very important, parents, that you speak up. It's very important that you have your calendar, your log, your journal, your toolkit, the way that if you've been following for, this for weeks, you should be pretty well equipped. As I mentioned yesterday, we have a new resource for you. It is called the Back to School Update, and it is a written short form that you can give all of your child's teachers on the first day of school to let them know where your child is now and how distance learning went for them. It talks about some behavioral things. It talks about, focus, some mental health issues, all things that could possibly impede their learning now that they're in a brick and mortar environment, if they're in a brick and mortar environment. As we all know, distance learning was kind of winging it. So it's really important to be able to give the teachers some idea of where your child is now, since we don't have the data that underlies the IEP because it wasn't being measured during distance learning. Other important guidelines is that the school staff should come to the IEP meeting prepared with evaluation findings, prepared recommendations, and they must make it clear to the parents at the beginning of the meeting that the services proposed by the school are only recommendations. As I mentioned earlier, nothing can be decided before all of you are in that room. So these are recommendations for review and for discussion with the parents. Parents, you need to bring your concerns and do your homework and your questions and recommendations also to the meeting. Third, the IEP team must include a representative of a public agency. And this is really confusing, so I'm just going to read it out loud. So it's who is qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of children with disabilities, is knowledgeable about the general curriculum, is knowledgeable about the availability of resources of the public agency, and must have authority to commit agency resources, i.e. approve expenditures. That person is usually the director of special ed from the district level. It may be someone else, but that's usually who it is. The IEP must include a statement of present level of academic and functional performance, the Plaafp. And then that gives rise to the goals, objectives, and the services that enable the child to reach the goals. Plaafs must be written in objective, measurable terms. So this is where we get, this is where 90% of the cases that come through my door come from, is that the goals are not measurable for various reasons. So the Plaafp is very critical for us to determine if the goals are measurable. Goals are required in all areas of the child's unique needs. They're not restricted to any category of eligibility nor to the general curriculum. So if a child has, a disability in reading, it doesn't preclude them from getting services or accommodations in gym, if that's what is required to give them access to the curriculum. So really important. Goals are not required in every area of the general curriculum where only accommodations and modifications are needed. So let's say that you have a child who is hearing impaired in gym. There's a little device that they can put in their ears, and it also goes around the teacher's neck. So the teacher is talking directly into their ears, and then they can hear and participate fully the same way a child without a hearing impairment can. So that would be a case where you have an accommodation or support that just levels the playing field, and you don't need to measure that goal or the progress because it's just working. So that isn't what we're talking about when we're talking about the goals, objectives, benchmarks, all that stuff. It's important for parents to know that administrative personnel cannot override the IEP team concerning which services are to be provided or not. So let's say that the IEP team decides that your child needs the recordable pen because they're not good note takers. And it's very hard for them to pay attention to the learning source through their eyes and process writing about it, by looking down and then employing the fine motor skills of in their hand. And the the teacher decides that, it's not working, we're not going to use it. This teacher stops charging it, or the student stops charging it, and that's just over. You can't do that. You have to go back to the IEP team, either formally or informally, address that it's not working, or it's ineffective, or the goals aren't going to be met, and then continue on, um, either with some additional support in addition to the reportable pen, or perhaps there needs to be some instruction for student and teacher about the reportable pen. There could be any number of reasons that it's not working the way it's intended to in any particular situation. So that needs to be examined and observed and reported. And, we don't just take it away and say wing it, because that does not level the playing field. That doesn't give every child access to the curriculum. And that's what you have to keep in mind. We've always done it that way is an absolutely unacceptable answer to how we're going to help a child. It's individualized. Every child. It might be the same as another child, but it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be the starting point. It should be discussed, and it should be determined that this is a great idea for this child to succeed. So that's really, really important. And another thing, a lot of times, because the IDEA has timelines and time limits as to when meetings have to occur to develop or update the IEP. And parents, you should know that the IDEA allows your schedule to trump the school schedule. So if they say you can only do Tuesday at 2 or Wednesday at 3, and you absolutely cannot be there either one of those days, they must accommodate you. I'm sure they're not happy with me telling you this, but it is right there in the IDEA. So we are going to continue tomorrow, and we will talk about the difference between measurability and measurable goals. And we will also talk about when goals are too vague, and observable, not measurable goals, and continue on with our series in talking about how you select goals. That will be Monday, is how you select goals. So let's really dig deep into this topic. It's really important. I really want you all to be armed to be the best advocates you can as we approach the school year. And let's take a different approach for our different learners. So with that, be the best you can be, enjoy the day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.